Hello everyone and welcome to Purple Rose Crafts. Today we're going to talk about how to make a knitted hat. So what I've actually done here is I have the beginnings of our knitted hat. In order to get to this stage, I casted on 100 stitches and then made about 1.5 inches wide knit to purl to ribbing for the edge. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the ribbing that I've done here, this is the tighter ribbing that I introduced in a previous video, which I will link up in the corner. And it is about 1.5 inches wide. Now you can increase or decrease this based on what you are intending to achieve with your hat. If you want it to be the type of hat that folds over the brim, you're going to want to make this ribbing a lot longer. If you want it just to be like a beanie with a little bit of an edging, this is going to be similar to that, then about 1 inch, 1.5 inches is probably fine. Even up to about 2 inches, I would say is kind of an ideal setup for the ribbing for the edge of the hat. Now, if you decide to just knit all the rows, because we're working on a round needle here, or we're knitting into the round, what usually ends up happening is if you just knit all the rows, it'll actually roll up, which is honestly really cute. But it wasn't the effect I was going for with this hat. My daughter chose this yarn. It is the Loops and Threads Soft and Shiny, and the color is called Teenage Dream. It's just so lovely with the pinks and the purples and the teal. I just love it so much. It's considered a 4 on like a medium weight, and they recommend using about a 5.5 millimeter knitting needle for it, or a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook, which we're going to knit this. It's just such a lovely yarn. It's really soft. It's really like kind of shiny. It's really kind of, it's perfect for a little hat for a little girl. My daughter's 5, so 5.5. She just loves all these colors, so she's really looking forward to this hat. Now, I have actually used a 4 millimeter knitting needle. Hopefully you can see that to make this ribbed edging. Now, this video is going to have a little bit more of like kind of background information in it than, strictly knitting stitches. So that being said, the 4 millimeter knitting needle, of course, is a lot smaller than the 5.5 millimeter knitting needle that the yarn recommends. I tend to like my knitting a little bit tighter. So for me, I would probably knit in about a 4.5 millimeter knitting needle anyways. And so I sized it down one size for this ribbing. And the reason I like to do that is because it actually just makes it a little bit tighter and a little bit stretchier when we actually go to put it on. When you're ribbing, if you use the same size or the same size needle as you do for the main body of the hat, what you'll end up with is it'll end up like kind of puffing out at the bottom and not being like a nice straight kind of ribbing. Now, what we're actually going to do now is we're going to switch from our knitting in the round on our single round needles, and then we're actually going to convert over to our double pointed needles. These are 4.5 millimeter double pointed needles. They're quite long, but it doesn't really matter once we're actually working on our stitches. And normally at this point, it would be the point where you would need to add or take away a couple of stitches if you needed it to get to the appropriate number of stitches for your body of your hat section. So when we're ribbing, we're doing multiples of 4, so 2 knits and 2 purls in this fashion. You can do multiples of 2 if you're going to do a 1x1 ribbing, and then that can obviously get you closer to the body of your hat. So I tend to make a lot of my hats are kind of free flowing. Unless I'm following a specific pattern, I am usually kind of winging it while I'm making a hat. So, and I make a lot of hats, so that's how I can do that. So in this case, what I've done is I've casted on 100 stitches, which is a multiple of 4. And for my daughter, she has asked for a striped hat, which of course this yarn is not striped, but it is beautiful. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to intersperse white stripes into the hat as we go. This will kind of give you as well a couple of different techniques, how to change colors while we're knitting, for example. All right, so right now we're gonna actually do a full knit row to get us onto our double pointed needles. So we're gonna probably just expect to be right around 1/3 of the 100 stitches, so around 33 stitches onto each needle as we knit onto the double pointed from this point, okay? So we're gonna take our yarn and we're going to take one of our needles. At first, we're only gonna use 3 of them, and then once we get into the second row, we'll use the 4th. I'm gonna insert my needles and we're just gonna do a straight knit row. So I'm gonna add 33 stitches onto this first needle in just a normal knitted fashion. Now we're stopping our ribbing at this point. We're gonna move into our body of our hat. So I'm gonna finish this first row and then we're gonna switch to the white. And we're gonna do about 5 rows of white, and then we'll go back and do a couple of rows of this color and back and forth that way up the hat, okay? And I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. If you're doing a specific pattern and it calls for, say, 4 stitches and you wanna put 36 on a needle at 36, which gives you 72, and then finish with 28, that's fine too, just to kind of keep your patterns together. So there's our 30 stitches for our first needle. So what we're gonna do now is just move it away from either end of the needle so that nothing can fall off. And then we're gonna just drop it into the front of the one that we're working from, the left-hand needle here. Okay, so now working into our second needle, we're going to insert our needle and we're just gonna start knitting onto the second double pointed needle here. So we're gonna add 30 stitches here, and then we're going to work our last 40 stitches onto our third double pointed needle. Now we're going to take our third 4.5 millimeter knitted double pointed needle and knit the rest of our rows worth of stitches onto this needle. And now we're just using straight knit stitch here, so fairly straightforward. Honestly, the more complicated or difficult part of this is working once you're already on the double pointed needles from one needle to the next. But even then, it's not all that difficult. It just seems like a lot when you're holding all these needles. Some patterns will tell you to insert a stitch marker at the end of your row so you know where you're starting your next row from. That's great if you want to do that. I tend to keep an eye on where my tail is hanging and don't often use a stitch marker, but it's definitely something as a beginner knitter I would recommend doing. That way you don't forget where you are and just continue knitting on when you should be doing a decrease row or something like that. Okay. All right, so now we're finishing up this last double pointed needle here. And in this case, we've worked our way off of the round needles with the tube between, and we're finished with those. So we're gonna actually move them to the side. We might come back to them later to do our decrease rows. But for now, we're gonna work on our double pointed needles because this is the size that I had for the right appropriate needle width that I needed, the 4.5 millimeter needles. My 4.5 millimeter needle in the round stitch, or in the round needles, is in use in another project. So we make do with what we have. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're going to insert our stitch marker. Now when we're working on our double pointed needles, it doesn't make sense for us to insert a stitch marker on the end of the needle. If we put it here, it's just going to fall off as we're knitting. You're going to work on the other side of the row and it's going to disappear. So what I often like to do is I will actually open my stitch marker. You can see it's like a bit like a safety pin and like this nice plastic. So what I will do is often insert my stitch marker 1 stitch before the end of the row so it doesn't go missing. So I'm going to insert my stitch marker here. And make sure you don't catch any of your stitches so that it doesn't, get caught in your yarn. But this will actually make it nice and secure on your needle. So we'll keep our stitches towards the center of the needle. And now we're gonna switch colors. So we're gonna knit 5 rows of white. And the white that we're using is our Loops and Threads in the Snuggly Wuggly. This is the big ball, but it's just a straight white. It is a 3 on the scale. Now, the reason I'm using a 3 with a 4 medium weight in this soft and shiny with loops and threads as well is it feels kind of thin to me. It feels more like a 3. So I kind of wish that I had the soft and shiny in the white, but I don't. So we're going to add in our loops and threads and continue working our hat. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually add a vertical stripe to the yarn, to the hat, just to kind of give us some give in our stitching. So it's going to give us a little bit of stretch to the hat. All right, so I've decided for this hat, we're going to actually do a knit 5 purl 1 pattern all the way around the hat to give us a vertical stripe on the hat to kind of give us some give, some texture, but not too much, because we don't want to take away from the beautiful soft and shiny, this, you know, gorgeous variegated yarn that we're using. Okay, so let's switch to our white. So I've inserted our needle as if we're going to knit, and we're actually just going to drop our soft and shiny, our Teenage Dream yarn here, our original color, and we're gonna pick up the white. Now, if you notice, I'm holding on to the back of the tail of the white yarn. You can leave a nice long tail if you feel the need. A few inches, you know, maybe about 4 inches is a perfectly, you know, normal amount. Any more than that, and you might end up getting it might end up getting in your way later on when you're knitting. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna pick up and start knitting with our white. So from here, we're gonna knit 5 and purl 1 to give us 6 stitches on our repeat. So there's our 5, and now we're going to bring our needle to the front, or our yarn to the front, and purl the 1 stitch. Now it's going to match up pretty well with our knits and purls from the previous row. Not perfectly, but once we get kind of past this first row, it'll be fine. All right, so we're going to continue. That's 3, 4, 5, and purl 1. All right, so we're gonna go around the row and continue using our white yarn. You don't really have to hold on to the tail of the white at this point, but you will when you get around to the end of the row and you're starting to work across this area again, because the white will be loose and so will the pink that we, you know, the variegated yarn that we're using that we dropped, okay? Because both of our tails are just kind of lying loosely on the inside of the hat, they will be loose, okay? So those stitches will be really loose when we work them. That's okay. We're not worried about them right now. We don't want to drop anything. We don't want it to pull through at all. So we're going to hold on to them, but they don't have to stay really, really tight unless there's any worry of the yarn falling through, okay? So don't feel like, you know, you have to hold on to each, the ends of both of those yarns for the entire time you're knitting. Some people will tie a knot in them. I tend not to do that. I tend to weave in my ends when my hat is finished, and I haven't had any trouble with, you know, the yarn pulling through. I do tend to go back, and if I see a hole in my work, I'll kind of cinch it up a little bit and remind myself that that was the end of 2 pieces of yarn. And it works the same way too if you're switching from one ball to the next. If you are using something large, like doing a blanket, and you're knitting, you're gonna change balls. So when you get to the end of a ball, you're gonna just, you know, leave yourself a tail, pick up the new ball, and off you go. And then just keep in mind when you get back to that section and you're working on it again, that it is loose. So you'll want to keep an eye on it and hold on to it as well. All right, so there's our 5 and our purl 1, and I will be back in a moment and I'll show you what I mean when we get to the end of the row. When we're working between one needle and the next, we're gonna finish our sets of stitches on this needle here, and then we're gonna end up freeing our empty needle, which is what we're going to use to work on the next row, so on the next needle. So we're going to insert and keep knitting along. So this is what tends to happen a lot, which complicates things for a lot of knitters, is that they just don't know what to do with it. People are working on their with double pointed needles, this corner area tends to have a lot of difficulty for a lot of people. What I tend to do is I will bring my right hand needle that we just finished working on to the front. I cinch my stitches up to the middle of the needle so nothing's going to go anywhere. And then, you know, it tends to be in the back maybe, but we bring it to the front and out of the way. So, and then I'll generally hold my working yarn nice and tight and start working my stitches off of my left needle again onto the new empty right needle. Okay, so when you're working, and this is in the front, it's really out of the way. I don't know how well you can see this, but it's not in my way at all. So I'm gonna, you know, loop my yarn over, and it really doesn't tend to give me much trouble when it's out of the way like that. You can also do it this way. This way it's gone to the back, and it's out of the way as well. And then once you kind of get a few stitches away from the edge of the next needle, it really doesn't, you're not anywhere near that one that you just finished on. So we're continuing to work our stitches around, knit 5, purl 1 to give us our nice vertical stripe as well. All right, so here we are coming back up to the end of our needles, and we're going to finish off. Again, this needle is going to it can feel like it's in the way. I tend to move my hands around the needle and kind of hold on to it a little bit, so it's not flopping around very much, in order to kind of knit up to it. That's kind of the most awkward part of working with double pointed needles for a lot of people, is that they feel like that because obviously there's so many needles that, you know, there's just a lot going on in any one section of the needles, right? So once we get to the end of our needle, you know, we're gonna hold on to the one that we're coming up through. We're gonna work over it and then continue on. So, all right, so let's continue on here. This is our last needle for this row, and then we'll see our stitch marker, and then I'll come back in just a second to show you what happens when with our new yarn that we're working in and the end of our old yarn. So you'll notice that I didn't cut off the end of the old yarn of the variegated one, this the Teenage Dream, because we're going to pick it up again. So I don't want to cut it off. I don't want to have too many you know, ends to weave in. So what I'm going to do is actually just leave it on the inside of my yarn, the inside of my hat, and continue knitting it. I'll pick it up and drop the white when it's time, and do our rows with that color, and then switch back to the white again. We're going to continue in pattern here, and then we're almost to this section. See, so I just actually moved my hand, so I was getting close to the needle that was coming up next, and so I move my hand around it, stick it between my thumb and my index finger, kind of get it out of the way while we continue to knit across the rest of the row. And that kind of gets it so that it's not bothering me while I work these stitches that are getting closer to it. And so now, once we've gotten back to our marker, we're going to take the marker from the right needle, or the left needle, put it onto the right, and now we're back to where we changed our colors. So you can see our colored yarn here is quite large, and our white initial stitch is actually going to be quite large as well. So we're going to grab onto our, where is it here? Our color, our variegated yarn here, and cinch it down just a little bit so it's tighter on our left hand needle, and then we're going to knit across. Now I actually like to weave this through my left, the fingers on my left hand to kind of get it to keep it being held tight while we knit with the one on the white on the right hand with my right hand here. Okay, so now we've reached the end of the row, and you can see that because the change between our white and our variegated yarn here is, you know, right between a couple of needles, we're going to end up with it between our needles here because we changed colors at the edge of a needle. Now, you don't have to have the end of your row be between 2 needles if you want. You can split it and put one onto, have an end be somewhere on a needle if you wanted. That will prevent some of that spacing happening. But once we get worked a little further down our hat, that will tighten up. And if you're noticing that there's a gap happening there, you might just need to kind of hold your yarn a little bit tighter, keep your tension a little bit more between the 2 needles. And that tends to work in most cases, okay? Here I'm going to hold on to the white end that we started with and then start knitting into the next stitch. Now that, of course, stitch will be loose because the end of our yarn is free, and that's why we're holding on to it, okay? So let's continue. So now we're going to continue in this fashion, we're going to work 5 rows of white before we switch back to our variegated yarn. And then we'll do a few rows of that, and we'll go back to our white again to kind of give us that nice striped pattern up our hat. There is no increasing or decreasing on any of these rows at this point. All right, so we're going to continue working our stripes here and changing back and forth between our colors. As I said, we're not going to cut off either color until we get to the end of the hat, and that way we can just continue working our 2 yarns up the inside of the hat, and we'll never see them because they'll be on the inside. This is going to be the end of this video. It is actually getting quite long, so we're going to actually do a part 2 video, and in that instance, we're going to come back and talk about how to do the decreases and how to kind of form the top of the hat to kind of make it nice and round. Okay, so stay tuned for that. That'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks. If you like what we're doing here and you want to catch that video, hit that subscribe button below and the bell so that you'll be notified when that video goes live. And if you like more of like a video or a picture tutorial instead of the video, or at any point in this video did not make sense to you, check out the blog post that goes along with this video as well at purplerosecrafts.com, and it will include the picture tutorial going along with it so that you can have a look and see what we're talking about as far as each individual step. Now, there was a lot of basics shown in this video, so if there's any questions that you have, please leave a comment below, and hit that like button if you like what we're doing here and you want to see more videos like this. Give me a thumbs up in the comments if you want more videos like this too. Okay, thanks so much for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.